Welcome to episode 87 of the Talking Friars podcast. Ben Fadden, your host here. Wasn't really planning on doing this episode because we just had one yesterday, episode 86, mainly discussing Jake Peavy's Hall of Fame case. Did that with Jacob, but today just me. But I wanted to do this because there was news, kind of Padres news that just came out. As I'm recording this on Friday morning, the January 7th, there was Padres news that just came out, which I'll get to. And then Jim Bowden, former general manager of the Cincinnati Reds and the Washington Nationals, he came out with an article this week, I believe Thursday, about the top 25 remaining free agents that are going to be on the market after the lockout is over. So I wanted to go over some of those names that he listed that were under the category of Padres fits, that players that fit the Padres that are in his top 25 list, and just kind of give you my thoughts on that. So before I get into the Padres coaching news, I did want to say that I will be having, again, I'll have a Major League Baseball executive, former baseball executive, who was involved in some pretty big trades and all that. He'll be on the podcast next week, probably Monday. So stay tuned for that. And then on Wednesday, I'll have a long form article coming out regarding Eric Hosmer and Matt Olson and a possible trade. And I'll do a podcast episode on that too. So expect probably another two episodes at least next week as well. Just trying to keep, talking baseball, keep talking Padres baseball with you guys, even though this lockout's going on. So first, let's get to this coaching news. Mlb Trade Rumors came out here with an article this morning, really recently, that talked about the Padres expressed some interest. They had conversations with Carlos Beltran, the former Met manager, for like 2 weeks before he got fired because of the whole Astros cheating scandal and all that. They had conversations with him about being on Bob Melvin's coaching staff. But according to New York Post Ken Davidoff, the talks never advanced to anything serious, whether that was on the coaching staff, Bob Melvin's coaching staff, the actual staff, or kind of in a front office position, kind of like how Mark Loretta just got in back with the Padres in kind of a special assistant role. Beltran kind of served in that kind of type role with the Yankees before he got the Mets job, before he obviously got fired, before he even managed a game. But I think that was really interesting that the Padres had a conversation with Beltran, at least, expressed some interest to see about his interest level in returning. I don't want to say that I would have been a huge fan of the move, just considering that I know he's a great baseball mind and all that, but with Bob Melvin's new coaching staff, I'm not so quite sure that they needed Carlos Beltran, right? I think they have, I know I don't want to jump the gun here, but it seems like they have a good enough, well-rounded staff with Bob Melvin experience, with Ryan Christensen and Matt Williams, a former manager, with younger guys, Michael Bedard as the hitting coach, Macias at first base. It just seems like they have a well-rounded coaching staff that they don't need Carlos Beltran's expertise or knowledge when they already have some knowledge in the clubhouse as well, just player-wise with Manny and some other veterans as well. So I don't think that was a necessity, but it's obviously interesting just to mention here at the top. So I did want to talk about that. Moving on to kind of the main reason that I'm doing this episode. Like I mentioned, Jim Bowden's piece in the Athletic, top 25 remaining free agents available, remaining after the lockout. And Bowden, he does these pieces a lot, and it's a former GM. So whenever a former GM writes something, I'm interested in it. I know some people might not be, but I am. Some people, just brush it off, and you can, he's not in the building, so you take this for what it's worth. but he's a former GM. He's smarter than any of us, right, about baseball. He has the experience of going through off seasons and all that. So I think it's still interesting to talk about. A couple of players to start off with that were not listed as fits for, according to Bowden, fits for the Padres, because he, in his article, there is a paywall behind it, but in his article, it's on the link. By the way, is posted on the Talking Friars Twitter account. You can see that if you go on there. His article, it lists the players, top 25, their stats, some description about them, and then at the bottom of each player, it'll say, fits. So teams, it'll list multiple teams that this guy fits with, that fits for the player, fits for the team needs, stuff like that. So two players that I thought were notable that were not fits for the Padres, according to him, were Kris Bryant and Nelson Cruz. Kris Bryant, obviously, he would come over from the Giants, but I think I don't agree, obviously, with Kris Bryant not being a fit for the Padres, especially considering there were reports before the lockout that they were interested in Kris Bryant. The Padres were interested in him. So for Bryant to not be a fit, that doesn't make sense. Just considering that they need a power outfield bat, Kris Bryant has power and he can play the outfield. Boom, that's a fit. He can play versatility. You want to check that box? Check that box. He can play third. He could probably play short, to be quite honest. He could probably play first. He could probably play any infield position. He's played center. He's played right. I'm sure he could play left. His versatility is a big plus. And if there's a DH, he can do that too, if you want to get him off his feet. So to say he's not a fit, that doesn't really make quite sense, especially when, like, Nick Castellanos, which I'll get to, is also being rumored as being somewhat of interest by the Padres. And Castellanos, I think is probably going to get paid more than Bryant is. So it's not like money is the factor for the Padres there. So I disagree with Bowden's assessment there with Bryant not being a fit there. Bowden also, what I thought was interesting, he said the other fits for Kris Bryant, obviously not the Padres, like I mentioned, were the Phillies, Giants, Mariners, Rockies, and Cubs. Some of those teams that I can agree with, right? The Phillies, Alec Boehm, he's struggling his second year. Maybe they do need a third baseman or they need outfield help. I agree with that. The Giants, obviously, they used him last year. They acquired him. They obviously can still need him. The Mariners, Kyle Seager retiring, need to fill a hole at third maybe. Their outfield, not really. That kind of should be set, because they have a lot of young guys, including Taylor Trammell coming up, who was acquired in that Austin Nola deal, along with Andres Munoz, who's probably getting healthy now. By the way, that would have been nice for the Padres to have this season, Andres Munoz's arm. The Rockies don't make sense. I mean, they're not even probably interested in even bringing back Trevor Story, they are, but Story obviously won't want to go back there. Because the Rockies are rebuilding. They just traded one of the best players to ever put on a Rocky uniform to the Cardinals for not much. And they gave him, $50 million to trade Arenado there. So they're rebuilding. I don't think Bryant would want to go there, especially a Boris client. And then the Cubs, that doesn't really make sense either. Like, they just traded him to the Giants last trade deadline. So why would they bring him back? They already, I'm not quite sure. I guess you could make the argument that they want to start contending and it's going to be a faster rebuild than most teams rebuilds because they brought in Stroman on a multi-year deal and all that, but they just traded him. Like, if they wanted to keep him, you'd think they'd make a more realistic extension offer instead of trading him at the deadline like they did along with Kimbrel and Rizzo and Baez. I think Bowden should have substituted the Padres in one of those spots, especially with the Rockies or the Cubs. So I don't really agree with Bowden there, with Bryant not being a fit for the Padres. Nelson Cruz is another one. I don't really agree there as well. He and Bowden, I forget all the teams, but I believe the Brewers and Cardinals were listed as fits for Bowden with Nelson Cruz. That doesn't make sense to me, because if you're going to include National League teams, then the Padres, they need more power in their lineup. They already expressed some sort of interest, right, according to The Athletic last year. about Cruz joining the team. Like, they had Padres players talking with Cruz about maybe seeing his interest in the team and making him want to come before the deadline last year, before he was traded to Tampa from Minnesota. So there was interest. There's been interest there, and the Padres need power. And if there's a universal DH, you think Nelson Cruz he's over 40. You think that he'd want to go to a World Series favorite, at least on paper. And I feel like that's, if the Padres do get a power outfielder, let's say a Castellanos or a Bryant or even a Jock Peterson, they look pretty good on paper, especially if you add a Nelson Cruz in there. So I think that he'd want to come. I think that he wants to be on a contender, and the Padres are that. I think they're more of a contender than a team, let's say, like the Cardinals, at least on paper. With the Cardinals obviously bringing in a new manager, Padres did too, but I think we're more confident. Anyone's more confident in Bob Melvin than they are in who is it, like Oliver Marmol or whatever. And Skip Schumacher, I think, is a bench coach there. So good luck to Skip, but I think any DH like Nelson, I think they'd rather be on the Padres than the Cardinals, but that's just me. So I don't really agree with Bowden's assessments of Bryant and Cruz not being fits. But with that said, kind of moving on to the fits that he mentioned, he had 6 guys listed as fits for the Padres in his top 25 remaining free agents post-lockout article. Number 1, as you could probably guess, is Nick Castellanos, age 29. Last year's 2021 WAR 3.2. Bowden was quoted in the article saying that Castellanos' best fit would be playing left field for the Padres. But Bowden said that he's not sure that the Padres are willing to spend the necessary money to land him, given their bulging payroll. And while obviously that's pretty obvious that the Padres, the big berry you think in bringing in Castellanos is maybe more competition, teams wanting to overpay for him because they're desperate or something, and the Padres maybe being unwilling to give him to overpay for Castellanos when there's other guys that like Jock Peterson or Eddie Rosario or Jorge Soler that might come cheaper at a 1 or 2 year deal. They don't want to, pigeonhole themselves. And obviously, even if they did the Hosmer contract with the long term there and not even certainty of being able to deal him, it's going to be hard. They just don't have a whole lot of flexibility there to add a bunch of money, like $30 million a year for a guy like Castellanos. So I agree with Bowden's assessment that money's probably going to be the biggest factor in bringing in Castellanos. Other fits that that Bowden said Castellanos could fit under, the White Sox, Rockies, Marlins, and Rangers. I get it, those teams from the money standpoint with the Marlins, but Texas I don't really agree with. I think Castellanos is more of a Padres fit than a Texas fit. Texas has already spent a bunch of money. They've already brought in Corey Seager on $325 million. That's a total overpay in my opinion. They already brought in Marcus Semien, which I thought was a good deal, but they've spent a bunch of money already. So I don't see them spending another fortune on Castellanos. While that might make their lineup good, they have a long way to go, I think, pitching wise. I think the Padres are already more of a complete team, obviously, than the Rangers. But those are other fits for Castellanos. I think, yes, the Padres will be going hard after Castellanos or Bryant. If I were the Padres, I've said this before, my number 1 target would be Bryant over Castellanos, just his versatility. I don't think there's really that wide of a gap. I know last year there was between their offensive production. Bryant is a power bat. He's shown that. And I'm big on the versatility. I know that they have Profar and Kim, but those guys don't produce offensively like Bryant does. And Bryant's still good defensively. He's won an MVP, a Rookie of the Year, so his talent's obviously there. That was the first guy. The second guy that Bowden lists was Saya Suzuki out of Japan. Age 27, he hit .319 last year in 2021. Suzuki, according to Bowden, could end up being the signing of the offseason. So Bowden is big on Suzuki, obviously coming over from Japan. I can't say that I wouldn't be against the signing of Suzuki. but I'd rather go with someone that's been in the major leagues, like a Castellanos or a Bryant, obviously. Or to be honest, I'd rather go short term with a Jock Peterson, a Jorge Soler, someone, or Eddie Rosario, someone like that. I'd rather go short term than bring in Suzuki on a longer term deal. And maybe I think part of that is just short term, I guess, recency bias or whatever, or just my recent experience, with bringing over Ha-Seong Kim. And he had difficulty, hitting the fastball, catching up with velocity while he was great defensively. And while Suzuki might be a better hitter than Kim is, I don't know, just the flashback from last year. It's kind of like I'd rather bring in someone that's been in the major leagues last year. That's just my opinion on him. Other fits that Bowden said, Texas, Seattle, and San Francisco. So Texas and Seattle keep getting mentioned. Teams that are willing to spend money. Texas, I'm just not so sure how much more money they're willing to spend. Signing Sager, signing Semin. Remember the last time when they all went all in money wise? I know it wasn't long-term deals, but when they brought in Kluber and Kyle Gibson and Mike Minor, that didn't work out. So I just don't know how much more the Mariners are going to spend. So I'm not really on the Texas train in terms of them going out and getting more guys, But Suzuki, I mean, if he translates over to the big leagues, yeah, he could be the signing of the offseason. He had 38 home runs, drove in 88 runs last year. His OPS was over 1,000, but that was in Japan against lesser competition. So that's the only reason I'd kind of be hesitant to do that. The third Padre fit Bowden listed was Michael Conforto. I have said this recently on one of the podcast episodes. I'm not really a big fan of Conforto coming to the Padres. He's more of a right fielder. That's where Myers plays. I know Myers could play left, and that's not even the main reason. I know Myers is only going to be here for one more year, but with Scott Boras being his agent, Boras, I think, is probably overplaying Conforto's demand interest on the market. He said, I think at the GM meetings before the lockout, that many teams are going after Conforto and that Conforto is like the king of queens or whatever. If the Mets who know him best, they don't even seem really interested in bringing back Conforto, then I don't even know how interested the Padres should be in bringing in Conforto. It just seems like I just feel like they would be overpaying, and I just don't want to do that for Conforto, who had a really down year last year. And I know that he has a history of hitting 30 home runs like he did in 2018 and 2019, as Bowden said. But there's just something about it that, like, with the .8 WAR last year, like, I guess if it's a short-term deal, I'd be more open to it. But I'm not giving that guy 4 or 5 years. There's just something about it where being a Boras client and how that Hosmer thing worked out with Boras. Now, I know Boras is going to have some good players that the Padres are going to have to interact with them with to get, but including Chris Bryant, I think. So you're going to have to talk with Boras and sign his clients, but there's just something about it where it's like a guy that, I don't know, it's just something like Hosmer, the overpay, Conforto, it seems like he's Boras, and it's his job, but it seems like Boras is really overhyping Conforto and just really making it seem like there's more interest than there really is. So I'm just not really that in with Conforto, but he is listed as one of the top 25 remaining free agents on post-lockout. So that's something to keep an eye on as another outfield option for the Padres, I guess. Joe Kelly is a fourth option. It was the fourth guy that was under a fit for the Padres, according to Jim Bowden. Age 33. His 2021 WAR last year, 0.7. I would have been in on Kelly if this was before the Padres brought in Robert Suarez and Luis Garcia to combine, with the depth up with the Lamets that they have. The Lamets, the Paddocks maybe as a bullpen piece, or Weathers, guys like that. Pomerantz coming back. I know it's health-wise, that's a question, but I'd be more into Kelly if that was before Preller already invested $14 million into two relievers already. So I don't think Kelly's really that big of a fit, just because I don't know how much of a priority continuing to add bullpen arms it will be for AJ Preller, Peter Seidler, and the Padres front office when they've already done that. I think their focus needs to be power outfield. They already, added to the rotation a little bit with Nick Martinez out of Japan right before the lockout. I know that deal's not done, so you can say, Ben, the deal's not done. I know, but I mean, it was reported that it was 4 years, $20 million. They just didn't get the paperwork done, so the deal's essentially done. So I think that they just need to focus more on power outfield and getting the DH done if that comes into effect once the lockout's over and the CBA's agreed to, whenever that may be. But so I would have been in on Kelly, and I agree with his Bowden's assessment of Kelly being a fit for the Padres if this was, at the beginning of the offseason. Hopefully that makes sense. Other fits, Kelly, St. Louis, Boston, Texas, and Seattle. Again, Texas and Seattle keep getting mentioned as players, so maybe Bowden knows more than I do, but I just don't. Maybe Seattle's more of an option. I just don't see Texas spending as much now. They just spent a lot of money, and I just don't think they're that close. They might just think that they're closer than they really are, so that might lead to them spending. But I would not. I just wouldn't bank on Texas spending a bunch on pitchers. Just to be quite honest, I don't think that they're there. The fifth, which is a little intriguing, is Zach Greinke, but this kind of that Bowden said for the Padres. This is intriguing to me because Greinke, his numbers have declined. His fastball velocity, I saw it's the lowest of his career. That's what it was last year. He wasn't even making consistent starts for the Astros last year. He was more of a bullpen piece, which I thought was kind of interesting. So I question his effectiveness, but kind of like John Lester, it would be like a 1 year low risk, high reward thing. I just don't see much interest in Zach Greinke on the market. I'm not a fan of Zach Greinke. I've had some personal interactions with him just as a fan. He's kind of a jerk, but that's just me. If he helps the team win, I guess I'm in on him, but he had a 4.16 ERA last year. Again, his fastball velocity lowest of his career, wasn't even a 1.5 win player last year. He's obviously, he's age 38. His numbers have declined. I don't know how much he has left in the tank. And the Padres, with a bunch of pitchers coming back, I know you can't have enough starters, but I'd rather go someone like a John Lester than someone like Zach Greinke, to be honest. The Padres just have options. You could go down the line: Clevenger, Snell, Darvish, Musgrove, Paddock, Weathers, Lamet, Morahone. There's just option. That's 8 guys right there. Nick Martinez is another guy that could start. Stamens has open games in the past. That's 10 just right there. And we don't know about Ray Kerr. We don't know about Mackenzie Gore's development. So that could go up to 11, 12 options to at least open games. So I'm not really in on Greinke. I know it would be a 1 year deal, but again, I think the focus, if injuries happen and he's still unsigned, maybe you could go that route. But I don't think should be a top option for the Padres. I don't think they should be focused on starting pitching. And I think that they should just, at least what I'm going into spring training, is all these injuries can't happen again, right? In 2 years in a row. I just don't see that happening. So I'm not really that in on Zach Greinke. And then the sixth guy that Bowden named is probably predictable the most, and that's Tommy Pham, obviously former Padre, hit the free agent market. He said that he's willing to return. I think it would be on a 1 year, $5 to $7 million type deal, kind of be a bench player. He did have a career best 155 games last year. 155, sorry, I can barely talk right now. 155 games last year he played, career best for Tommy. Age 33, so he's not old. His WAR was 1.4. I just think that they need more power. I think he hit 15 home runs last year. He does have power in his bat. I know he works his butt off. I keep going back to it. Tingler saying last year at spring training that they wanted to keep playing him in games because when they didn't, he would just work all day in the cage and overwork himself. So, he's in the gym all the time. I know he likes to party, but he does work his butt off. So I know that he wants it. But I think in terms of power, fielding, defense, I think that the Padres could have better options. I think Tommy is a good bench option. And he stayed healthy last year. I think he's an option that could come in games if they, somehow if they don't like a matchup with a lefty like Grisham or something. But I think Tommy is a good option that they'll sign right before spring training or something on a 1-year deal, prove it type deal, and then he goes elsewhere after 2022. So I think that is a fit, obviously, but more in a bench role. I think if he's the starting left fielder, I think that's going to be a disappointment come opening day, because that means that the Padres didn't really, I mean, not really, they didn't improve their outfield, and at least offensive production wise. And that's not including, obviously, assuming Myers and Grisham and Pham all have better years. Okay, then they improved. But in terms of additions, they didn't improve. So I'd be open to Pham as a bench bat again. So I wasn't in agreement with Bowden in summary here in his article about Nelson Cruz not being a fit and Chris Bryant not being a fit for the Padres. I think they are. Obviously, Cruz, if there's a universal DH. So I'm in on both of those guys. Bryant would be my number one target once this lockout ends. If I was the GM of the Padres, I'd be in on Castellanos, obviously, I'm just more hesitant on him than Bryant, just because I just think that he's going to get overpaid. I'm not really so in on Suzuki, not really in on Conforto, not really in on Kelly and Greinke, because that's just not where their focus should be right now. But I am in on Pham as a bench option. So that's my reaction to the Athletic article. Again, Beltran, there was interest, I guess, a little bit for the Padres on the coaching staff for a special assistant role in the front office, but nothing really was serious in those discussions. But that's the episode 87. Talking Friars podcast, again, at Talking Friars, Twitter and Instagram. Hit us up with any questions you want answered on the podcast. We'll get that done. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Just look up Talking Friars for all of our content there. Again, next week should probably have about at least 2 episodes, an interview with a former baseball executive who was a president of a Major League Baseball club. So he'll have some insight there next week. And then I'll have another podcast about a Hosmer-Olson trade a little bit there. So that'll be midweek, probably next week. So Ben Fadden here, host of the Talking Friars podcast. Thank you so much for listening and watching. And until next time, let's go Padres.